Well, Mr. Ambassador, welcome, and thank you for joining me here at the Grand Strategy Summit. We have a lot to cover, and we only have 30 minutes, and I want to keep this conversation focused on the future and on
Jim
solutions.
says 30 minutes because he knows my first answer will be 30 minutes, so that'll cover the whole thing.
Well, let's see what happens. But I want to start with an analysis of the state of the world today. Your predecessor, Henry Kissinger, who was the first speaker at this summit 3 years ago, wrote, "An important school of thought maintained that stability and peace were the normal state of international affairs, while conflict was the consequence of either misunderstanding or malevolence. Nixon's perception was more dynamic. He viewed peace as a state of fragile and fluid equilibrium among the great powers, a precarious balance that in turn constituted a vital component of international stability." How would you assess the balance of power in the world now among the world's great powers?
Well, thanks, Jim. I'm going to take the chairman's privilege just for a moment, because I won't see much of you today. I've got a fair number of bilateral meetings. I have to go up to the Hill. But I want to thank Jim and Chris and Jameson for putting on this conference. They do a terrific job, and the fact that we're full, and if you look at the lineup of speakers that we have coming after me, it's just terrific. So thank you, Jim. I was waiting to see a head of state 2 days ago up at the UNGA in New York, and I happened to be with the Deputy Treasury Secretary for President Biden, who until recently was the president of the Obama Foundation, and he was telling me about how great things are going in Chicago, and they're building, and I congratulated him, and he said we've raised $1.2 billion. Like, gosh. We're doing well with our fundraising, but I think we're on track for 30 or 40 million, which we're very thrilled about, and a lot of you are responsible for that here. So thank you.
I'd love $1 billion too, though. So if anybody wants to kick in,
I'll admit I was a little jealous, but then I thought about it for a moment, and I think we saw it in the preview in this short video this morning. We've got the legacy that we're protecting of our president, who was a brilliant foreign policy strategist, and his ideas are worth far more than $1 billion. And those of Henry, and you think of the great leaders that came out of that administration: George Shultz, Cap Weinberger, Don Rumsfeld. You look at the legacy of the Nixon administration and what President Nixon did and said. And again, the whole conference could have been boiled down to two short clips that we saw just a moment ago. Think about what he said about the American defeat and withdrawal from Vietnam. Substitute Afghanistan for Vietnam, and the dominoes that fell, the invasion of Ukraine, the bullying of the Philippines by China. I mean, you could have just taken that and transported it, 25 years into the future, and it was spot on. And then his comments about Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, and is concerned that freedom, has to prevail, or otherwise we're going to have a new sort of despotism. Well, look at what we're seeing now with Xi Jinping, with Vladimir Putin, with the Ayatollahs, with Kim Jong-un in South Korea. Again, spot on. That was 1992.
92, and then again in 93, yeah.
So 30 years ago, you could have put Dick Nixon on the stage right now, and those words would have been totally timely. So when we think about the legacy that we have to protect and pass on to future generations with the Nixon Foundation and the library, I couldn't be more pleased to be working with you, Jim, and Hugh Hewitt did a great job before you, and all the chairmen that preceded me in keeping this library relevant. And now we've got the Strategy Summit, and you look at the folks that are speaking today, look at the folks in the audience, the students. I think we punched way above our weight, and I want to thank you and the whole team for everything you're doing with the library and the foundation, because I think we're preserving this Nixon legacy, and it's an important legacy as we just saw to preserve, because I benefited. I was lucky enough as National Security Advisor to have Henry in person and on the telephone pretty regularly. Future National Security Advisors, future Secretaries of State are going to be able to look at what Dick had to say, President Nixon had to say, and benefit from the wisdom. And so thanks for your efforts in preserving that legacy. That kind of ties into your question about great power competition. I just got back from New York. I was up at the UNGA for 2 days, met with heads of state and heads of government, I'm kind of a has-been, so I'm kind of surprised they took my meetings. Or in this case, they'll ask for meetings, and I'm not foolish enough to think that it's because I'm some sort of Kissinger figure, but they all think President Trump's coming back, and maybe will. The election's going to be very close. If you're a Republican, whatever state you're from, get out and vote early. I'd say often, but then I'd be a Democrat. But at least our foreign partners think there's a good chance President Trump's coming back, and so they want to talk to myself and Mike Pompeo and others. Keith Kellogg, who you'll hear later today, about President Trump's thinking on foreign policy issues that are facing America. But every one of them was concerned about this new axis of authoritarianism. And whether I was meeting with the Indians or the Middle Eastern leaders or European leaders, they're all concerned about this axis of Pyongyang to Beijing to Moscow to Tehran. We've got these four powers. They've got internal lines of communication between them in Asia and in Eurasia. And although there might be slight differences, China's Marxist-Leninist, Russia's imperialist, the Ayatollahs are concerned about Shia, kind of messianic Shia philosophy. But the one thing they've all got in common is they wanted to displace the United States as a leading global power. They wanted to displace the West and our values of freedom. And they think with us out of the way, that they can prevail ideologically and militarily. And so we're in a very precarious situation. You know, Kissinger always said in The Balance of Power, and when I talked to him and in his books, you know, always making sure that Russia, China, and the U.S., the three great powers in the world, you know, we're in some sort of balance and you know, like three balls that you're juggling. And that neither Russia or China, Beijing or Moscow, was closer to each other than they were to the U.S. The idea is to have some sort of wedge between the two of them. Now we've got Russia and China with an unlimited partnership, and we've got the U.S. in a very weak position with weak leadership, unfortunately. Fundamentally, the country's not weak. We're not in decline. That's a fundamental misunderstanding that many of our friends on the left have. They believe America's in decline because they've seen China rise. But America's percentage of GDP in the world, our reserve currency status as a dollar, our nuclear stockpile and deterrent when it's modernized will be the class of the world. So we're not in decline. But they believe they're managing an American decline against this ascendant group of dictators. And so we look very weak to our adversaries, but also to our partners. And we need to change that with peace and strength and get back to a position where America can, balance the world and the free world against our adversaries, but also get to a point where our adversaries realize that they're better off dealing with us rather than having this unlimited partnership between each other.
Well, you mentioned peace through strength, and that's the subject of an article that you recently wrote for Foreign Affairs magazine, which got a lot of attention. And you offer a series of policy prescriptions that I would argue form the basis of what we're here to talk about today, which is a 21st century American grand strategy. You mentioned Tehran. Let's jump to Iran, because in January of 2020, when you were National Security Advisor, you said very publicly that you hoped that the people of Iran would be able to choose their own leaders someday. Should that be the West's ultimate objective with Iran? And if so, how does Iran get there?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jim. I was at the CFR yesterday, so it was kind of like being behind enemy lines in New York at their beautiful headquarters or townhouse, and the folks couldn't have been nicer. Maybe because I published this article in Foreign Affairs, their flagship magazine. But they asked the same question about China. Do we want regime change, and what do we think about the people of China? And I think the answer is the same for Iran. Look, we're not interested in I think we've gotten away from this idea of forever wars, that we can somehow use the U.S. Army or Marine Corps or Air Force or Navy to go in and impose our form of democracy on some other country and nation build. We don't want that. But what we do want for the people of Iran and for the people of China and for the people of Russia is to see this America, the idea that Ronald Reagan talked about, that we're a shining city on the hill, that there's this beacon of liberty, and really what I call is a beacon of hope, so that even if you're in a gulag, a Russian gulag, even if you're in a Chinese Uyghur concentration camp in Xinjiang, that there's this idea, maybe America's not going to save you personally, but there's this idea that freedom thrives and that freedom's alive. and that there's hope, that because there's a place called America, there's hope that maybe your kids and grandkids won't end up in a gulag. And I think we've got to be there for the people of Iran. And one of the issues with Iran, we thought about a kinetic response at the end of the Trump administration to the many provocations of the Iranians. I mean, they're threatening and planning and plotting to kill the president of the United States, or the former president of the United States, the leading candidate for president of the United States to take office again, which is not very smart geopolitically to tell the guy who may win that you're trying to kill him. And they've done that very publicly in videos. Unfortunately, I've been on that same list in the same video. But they're engaged in malign activity against Israel. They've attacked Israel. Make no mistake about it, this is not just Hamas and Hezbollah. They wouldn't fire a BB gun across the border with Israel without the total approval of the Iranian regime. They're now starting to find out that maybe that was a bad idea, that they focused so long on Hezbollah and building up the Hezbollah missile batteries and missile stocks in Lebanon, that they failed to realize that the Israelis were preparing as well. And what the Israelis had in store was pretty amazing. We saw that last week. But we're seeing maybe something even more impressive yesterday and today with these bombing raids by the IDF, by the Air Force, the Israeli Air Force. They've used LiDAR and radar and sophisticated intelligence to map out where all these missiles and bombs are across Lebanon, hidden in buildings, hidden in civilian homes, hidden behind Patankan villages. And they're systematically not only taking out the leadership of Hezbollah, but they're systematically taking out the arsenal of Hezbollah. And so maybe the Iranians underestimated themselves. It's a little unfortunate that we're relying on tiny Israel again, courageous Israel, to do the work that we should have been doing to protect the free world against Iran. But the two things with Iran are one, kinetically, if we attacked them, counterintuitively, we're very popular in Iran. The CIA, as many of you know, and this is public, so I'm not speaking out of school, does surveys, public opinion surveys in countries all across the world to see how America is viewed, how we're gauged, what the people of the country, not just the regime, think about the United States. And funny enough, in Iran, I remember this, we first started seeing these results when I was in the Bush administration. I was working with John Bolton up at the UN. America is the number one country that's the most popular among the populace of Iran. They love us. They're wearing New York Jets, T-shirts. Maybe they don't get enough news to know the Jets record isn't very good. But don't say that to Woody Johnson, our good friend, but owner of the Jets. But we're very popular with the Iranian people. And what we don't want to do is in striking Iran, we don't want to turn the populace against us and have them rally around the regime. So that's a big issue. And then the second issue is, if we use up all our strategic weapons, and we're doing this to some extent now with the Houthis, which is not smart on our part. We're using $1 million anti-aircraft missiles to take down drones that cost less than $20,000 to the Houthis. That's unsustainable. But we're also using the exquisite weapons and capabilities we have against these low-tech weapons and taking them out of the China fight, taking them out of the fight for Taiwan. So for every SM-6 missile that we use, it costs over $1 million of your money, of your taxpayer money, to take down a homemade drone in Yemen or in the Red Sea. That's one Chinese ship that's going to survive an invasion of Taiwan. And so we got to think very, very carefully about how we're using our weapons. If we hit Iran hard, we're going to deplete that stockpile. We've already depleted much of it with Ukraine, and we're going to have a situation where we may not be able to deter China from Taiwan. So regime change is problematic in Iran for those reasons. But having said that, we for whether it's China or Russia or Iran or even North Korea, we've got to be the idea of America has to penetrate through the firewalls, through the regime media, and get to the people of Iran that there is a place called America and that they have a brighter future someday down the road.
To your point about American popularity in Tehran, for those of you that follow the Nixon Foundation on social media, on Instagram or Facebook or X, our number one constituent geographic group of followers that are the most highly engaged is from Tehran. which is very interesting. So sort of underscores your point.
I think we got a fair number of Persian Americans who are in LA. So if you grew up in Southern California, you know a lot of Persian Americans. You know they're great Americans and
Absolutely.
and great people. And you kind of understand how sad it is for Iran with the wealth of that country and the geography that's so similar to Southern California, the Mediterranean climate, the diversity of geography there, the minerals, the oil. That could be such a rich, great country. And was with some problems. I'm not excusing some of the overreach and the authoritarianism of the Shah, but think of Iran with all the people you know that are Iranian Americans. Think if they were back. It's kind of like Cuba. Think if they were back in Iran, running that country, and it had a modicum of democracy, and it wasn't wrapped up in the Shia extremism and the sheer corruption of the Revolutionary Guard that's taking all the money from the middle class and sending it to Hezbollah and the Houthis. But think of the prosperous, wonderful influence Iran could be on the world if it had some of these folks we have in Southern California back running things in Tehran.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking about Israel and America's alliances. Let's keep going on that topic because it's such an important element. But you wrote in the Foreign Affairs article, quote, "Of course, Washington should keep open lines of communication with Beijing, but the United States should focus its Pacific diplomacy on allies such as Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea, traditional partners such as Singapore, and emerging ones such as Indonesia and Vietnam. Is this essentially a Pacific version of NATO, and what should the overarching objective of this group be?"
Yeah, so I just returned. I was in South Korea 2 weeks ago. Actually went into, it was the first time I've been.
Do you get any sleep?
No, not enough. So I was in South Korea. It was the first time I'd been there, and having been in the Army and in government service for many years, I had plans on various occasions to go to South Korea, but had never made it. And so it's an amazing country, great ally of the United States. And I got to go up to the DMZ, and in one of the blue UN huts, my team and I walked over, and Lomri was with me. We walked over to the North Korean side, so I've technically touched a toe into North Korea, into the DPRK, so I can check that off the bucket list. And in conversations, I had a long conversation with President Yoon, who was very different than President Moon, who was in office when I was in office and President Trump was in office. It went from a very leftist government in Seoul to a very conservative government, much more pro-American, much more attuned to the threat from the north and the threat from China. And we talked about this idea of how we behave in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific region. I still call it PACOM, but I've got to get used to Indo-PACOM. And how we have what Prime Minister Abe called a free and open Indo-Pacific. And this idea that it's not just freedom and democracy, but that sovereignty prevails. So, all the countries you mentioned are democracies with the exception of Vietnam. But Vietnam's a partner and a strong partner against China. Again, counterintuitive, thinking of what we heard from President Nixon and what we all remember as younger people. You're too young for it, Jim, but the Vietnam War and the withdrawal and the way we think about Vietnam. Vietnam is very concerned about its own independence and sovereignty, as we saw in our war, as the French saw in their war, and as the Chinese saw in 1978 when they invaded Vietnam. They're tough people. And although they don't share our values of rule of law and democracy, it's run by a communist party, tempered by capitalism. They do care greatly about their freedom. And so when you look at the various alliances that have developed in the Indo-Pacific, the first one, and perhaps the most important alliance, and I give the Biden administration, which I really do some credit here, is this trilateral alliance between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. The capability of the South Korean Army, and especially their Navy, is incredible. They've come a long way. They're actually now supplying 1,000 tanks to Poland. They're able to build warships almost at the same clip as China. They've got a great industrial base. The people are industrious, innovative. Then you combine that with Japan, and as President Trump used to say, the Chinese better be careful what they ask for, because we saw what Japan can do. Granted, it was a few years ago, but the Japanese are, when they're motivated, they can be pretty tough themselves and very capable. And then you take the United States and you put those two together. So the Camp David Accords that President Biden, when he pulled together Prime Minister Kishida, President Yoon, and himself at Camp David and got this deal signed, was very important. Now, I don't want to claim credit for it, but I can say that the foundation for that was laid in the Trump administration. We had a very contentious relationship between Japan and South Korea at the time, because we had Prime Minister Abe, who was a conservative and wanted to move forward and confront China, and we had President Yoon, who was a leftist and wanted to be very accommodating towards China. And our key intelligence agreement, the GSOMIA, was about to collapse. And I think it was my first or second week as the National Security Advisor. I had the South Korean National Security Advisor and the Japanese National Security Advisor in the Roosevelt Room. We were trying to negotiate the complete renewal of the GSOMIA, which didn't look like it was going to happen for many historical reasons and historical grievances that the South Koreans had against the Japanese, who'd been the colonial overlords in Korea for over 50 years. You heard things like comfort women and that sort of thing, which the Japanese believed had been settled 2 or 3 or 4 times, and they'd have to settle it again, and they didn't want to. But the good news is they both wanted a picture with President Trump, who I had over in the Oval Office. We give him the deadline. No pictures unless we get this deal done. And this was in the heyday of Twitter. And so we got the deal done, and the pictures were taken, and the foundation was laid for what happened. But you've got the Trilateral Alliance, you've got AUKUS, the UK, Australia, US, which most of us think of as a nuclear sub-deal, but goes beyond that in cooperation. And then you've got a very important diplomatic arrangement. I spent a lot of time yesterday in a bilateral agreement with Dr. Jaishankar, the bilateral meeting with Dr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Minister of India. This quasi-alliance, it's a diplomatic arrangement right now. It's not a military arrangement yet, but maybe it'll become one. We're doing a lot of exercises. We've got India, Australia, Japan, and the U.S. And so between the trilateral agreement, the AUKUS agreement, and the Quad, and our bilateral treaty arrangements with the Philippines and Thailand, and then the old ANZUS agreement with Australia, New Zealand, and the U.S., although New Zealand's kind of taken a pause from that since the Reagan administration for nuclear reasons. We have the infrastructure in place. I don't think we need a new NATO. I think we've got a lot of capability and alliance capacity that's already been built and structure that's already been established in the Indo-Pacific to keep China at bay. And China's worried about that and is trying to drive a wedge in all of those organizations. I don't think they'll be able to, and I think that our partners in the Indo-Pacific want us there. They know the value of having America, a strong America in the region. And I think we're doing pretty well on the alliance front. Where we're not doing well enough is on the capability front. The U.S. Navy's literally falling apart, and America looks weak after the withdrawal from Kabul and the kind of this green light to Putin to invade Ukraine, with President Biden's comment about it. A minor incursion might not engender a U.S. response. So our allies are a little bit worried about America's resolve. But the structure is there, and I think it's pretty strong.
Well, you just brought up the fact that we have some issues with the Navy, and Congress has not made investments in our Navy a priority. You've also identified in the article sagging recruitment numbers for the military, problems with readiness, slow, antiquated methods for weapons procurement. How do we get Congress focused on the need to build? I think you call for a 355-ship Navy. What more needs to be done to increase America's military capabilities and readiness?
So another great question. I'm going over to the House Study Group on the GOP side today to talk to them at lunch and do a Q&A with them. And this is one of the issues: is how do we get our military readiness back in shape? I mean, number one, the fact that we can't recruit for the military. I mean, we need some more. We need more Top Gun movies. We need more Officer and a Gentleman movies. The kind of movies we grew up with and I grew up with that. Where you had Richard Gere and Tom Cruise and Deborah Winger, A Few Good Men. We need to start making the military something that's great. Instead, we've gone on this woke experiment in the military. I mean, the kids that are joining the military are young men that play football. Okay, they don't want to be counseled on being woke. I mean, they play football in rural Idaho and Utah and Alabama and Mississippi. They're young women who are on the volleyball team. They're young women who ran track, in the inner cities. They're tough kids and who've kind of made it on their merit and learned teamwork. And some of this goes back to England when Wellington was asked how he defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, and he said it wasn't one at Waterloo; it was one on the playing fields of Eton and Harrow. The teamwork that was learned, those kids playing rugby and getting toughened up. So we got to get rid of the wokeness. And then on the procurement front, it's a disaster. I mean, we've got to fix procurement in the Navy. And the idea that it takes 10 or 15 or 20 years to put a new platform in place, that's not how the world works anymore. And we're seeing this with the Ukraine war. I remember in the first week or two of the war, I happened to be in D.C., and Jake Sullivan, the current national security advisor, very graciously invited me to come over to the White House and talk to him. And we were chatting, and he said, "You won't believe it. We've got these homemade drones with nothing but a hand grenade that's attached to them." I mean, of course, the Ukrainians have gotten better now, but the drone would fly over the tank would open its hatch, the drone would drop a hand grenade down the tank's hatch, blow it up. And so for $1,000, a million or plus Russian tank was being destroyed. We can't wait, the way we used to for these platforms. Now, part of that problem, which we're going to fix, but which gives me hope, is that it's not going to be the government that saves us on this front. It's going to be our private industry. I mean, our space program was in disarray. We were getting killed by the Chinese. We couldn't put a man in space or a woman in space. And along came Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others with their ingenuity and their innovation. And all of a sudden, we're killing everybody in the space race again because of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and others. You look at in Intel, it's been totally, which is calcified, and we've got too many people and unclear missions, and Palantir comes in, and Strider from Utah comes in, and Palantir changes the way that we target and uses AI to change the world, and puts us back in the game on the Intel front in a way that the Chinese can't match. Again, because of a guy like Alex Karp or the Levesque brothers in Salt Lake with Strider. You've got these American, this ingenuity of the Musk and the Peter Thiels and the Palmer Luckies at Anduril. I was at Anduril the other day in Costa Mesa, and you go down and look in their showroom, and the drones that they're developing, the UAVs underwater, above air, airborne aerial UAVs, space-based UAVs. It's incredible, and they're doing this on their own budget. They're coming up with the ideas. They're building them. There's no program of record, and so it's gonna be, these guys are like rocket men, in the Marvel movies, and so it's gonna be the Elon Musk and the Palmer Luckies and the Alex Karps that are gonna really fix our procurement and save us. But we've got to embrace it, and the Pentagon has to embrace that entrepreneurial spirit that brought us the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts. When we embrace that in the defense sector, and when the big contractors realize that that's the way to make money and to prevail against the Chinese and to deliver to our warfighters the platforms they need, that'll change. And the last thing I'll just say, on the Navy, you probably just saw we had the oiler that ran aground in the Red Sea, and we can't get a commercial oiler. We can't supply oil and gas to our carrier battle group in the Middle East. I mean, it's just an embarrassment. There was a Babylon Bee headline that just said, "The Navy's giving up. It's just too hard," and we'll just have admirals. We won't have any ships because it's difficult to go to sea. It's salt water. It's corrosion. It's you pack all this ammunition in a box and put it in with nuclear power reactors, and then you send it out to sea. That's too dangerous. So we got to get the fighting spirit back. We got to figure out how to maintain our subs, maintain our ships, sail them properly. And again, this kind of ties back into the whole woke thing and getting the right kids who've always blessed this country with their willingness to sacrifice and serve us, getting them back on the bridge and in the engine rooms of these ships and go back to kicking butt and taking names.
That's a great way to conclude. Mr. Ambassador, thank you. And do go on and read the ambassador's article in Foreign Affairs. I think it's one of the best explanations of truly the beginnings of a 21st century grand strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And again, thanks to all of you for being here. You honor us with your presence, and please tell your staff, the whole team, how grateful we are on the board and me as chairman for putting on this conference and all the great work you do at the library, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.